This video is brought to you by Brilliant. Today, Japan gets a new prime minister after a dramatic leadership election, Albania gets one step closer to EU membership, and Argentina's poverty rate spikes under President Milei. From TLDR News, this is your daily briefing for Friday the 27th of September 2024. Japan's ruling Liberal Democratic Party, LDP, has elected Shigeru Ishiba as its new leader, and by extension, the country's new prime minister. Ishiba, the more moderate and reformist candidate in the race, beat right-winger Sanai Takaichi in the runoff round on Friday, despite Ishiba's performance in the first round earlier in the day suggesting Takaichi was in the much stronger position. Ultimately, in the runoff, Ishiba won 215 votes, 189 from LDP lawmakers and 26 from local party chapters, while Takaichi received 194, with 173 from lawmakers and 21 from local chapters. As a quick reminder, the LDP, which has ruled Japan for nearly all of the past 7 decades, was thrust into a leadership election following the resignation of party leader and Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. Kishida's resignation came after a turbulent few years for the party, as a series of scandals saw Kishida's approval hit historic lows and eroded public trust in and support for the LDP. His resignation set up perhaps the most unpredictable and open party leadership election in decades, particularly as the LDP had recently dissolved virtually all of its influential party factions in the wake of a slush fund scandal. So, who is Japan's next prime minister, Shigeru Ishiba? 67-year-old Ishiba is a former defense minister and has been in politics for a long time. In fact, this was his 5th, and he said final, run for the LDP leadership. Described as an idealist and coming from the more moderate wing of the Conservative Party, Ishiba has been unafraid of criticizing the party's leadership, something that's made him popular with the public but has strained his relations with fellow lawmakers. Ishiba has described himself as a defense otaku, i.e. a defense policy geek. He's called for an Asian version of NATO, wants to put the US-Japan military partnership on an equal footing, supports amending the country's pacifist constitution, and supports legislation to allow married couples to keep separate surnames, something that's recently divided the LDP. With Ishiba facing Takaichi in the runoff, you probably couldn't have got two more contrasting candidates. Takaichi, an arch-conservative who was a protege of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, versus Ishiba, known for his open criticism of Abe's rule, something that made him an enemy of the party's right wing. Ishiba, who'll officially become Prime Minister next week, therefore faces a challenge in leading a party that's clearly split into ideological camps. He wants to accelerate party political reform, which is something that will be necessary to change the image of the embattled party in voters' minds ahead of the next general election, due in October 2025. However, Ishiba could opt to dissolve parliament in favour of an early election. Now, if you enjoy the daily briefing, you might also want to check out our recent interview with the UK Chancellor over on the TLDR podcast channel. Be sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss out on any of our new videos. Albania's path to EU accession will be decoupled from North Macedonia's, following a unanimous decision by EU member state ambassadors in a move that could be instrumental in catapulting Albania's progress on its road to EU membership. The memberships of the two Western Balkan countries were coupled together after the formal launching of negotiations in the summer of 2022. However, due to disputes between EU member Bulgaria and North Macedonia, mainly regarding minority rights, the actual opening of chapters held up with no end in sight, directly halting Albania's process. This discord between Bulgaria and North Macedonia has been exacerbated by North Macedonia's new nationalist government, which has shown a defiant stance towards both Bulgaria and Greece, which for decades vetoed North Macedonia's EU application over the country's name. Albanian Prime Minister Edi Rama has expressed frustration over the sluggish accession process thus far, but will now turn a new page for this country of 2.7 million people. Albania will open formal negotiations with the EU in October and start opening chapters of the acquis, which correspond to different areas of EU legislation that candidate countries must adopt. Albania will have to open and close 35 chapters. Without a consensus in North Macedonia, it's likely that Albania will advance in the EU accession process, while North Macedonia will face further setbacks. In other news, Argentina's poverty rate has skyrocketed to 52.9% under the libertarian president Javier Milei's austerity program, marking the highest level in 2 decades. And it's a warning sign for Milei as his popularity begins to falter. The latest data shows that this is 11.2 percentage points higher than in the second half of 2023, when it stood at 41.7%, meaning 3.4 million Argentines have fallen into poverty this year. Since taking office in December, Milei has implemented stringent austerity measures aimed at tackling inflation, which reached an astonishing 300% in April. Whilst his administration argues that these cuts to public spending are necessary to avoid hyperinflation, critics, especially those from the opposition, contend that such measures are worsening the plight of working families and pensioners. Polls seem to reflect this discontent, showing a significant drop in Milei's approval ratings, particularly among retirees affected by his veto of a pension increase. Job losses have also been alarming, with at least 136,000 positions eliminated since Milei took office. Despite a reported 1.7% month-on-month growth in economic activity in July, surpassing the 0.6% increase Bloomberg analysts had predicted, experts warn that Milei needs to restore public confidence by offering tangible improvements where citizens can feel the improvement in their daily lives. Austria is preparing for an election on Sunday that could, if polling bears out, see a victory for the far-right Freedom Party of Austria, or FPO. Now, the FPO has actually been in government twice before, as the coalition partner of the mainstream Conservative People's Party, OVP, in the early 2000s, and more recently in the late 2010s. Both stints in government ended early amid infighting and scandal. However, the FPO has recovered remarkably since it crashed out of government in 2019, and has been leading the polls for nearly 2 years now. It railed against government-imposed restrictions and vaccine mandates during the COVID pandemic. It has also benefited from migration being on the European agenda, as its Fortress Austria programme calls for a ban on what it calls political Islam, and the cutting of provisions for asylum seekers, the blocking of family reunification visas, and is also committed to so-called remigration. The economic shock of COVID, then Russia's invasion of Ukraine, has made the cost of living a key concern for voters too, and the FPO has blamed stubborn inflation on migration and the war in Ukraine. In fact, the FPO opposes sanctions on Russia and any support for Ukraine, saying it undermines Austrian neutrality, and its MPs even walked out of a speech by Ukraine's President Zelensky to the Austrian parliament. Now, all parties have rejected working with the FPO under its leader Herbert Kickl, but the OVP, which has managed to significantly close the polling gap in the run-up to the election, has left the door open to a coalition with the far-right party if Kickl steps back. Alternatively, the OVP could seek to form a sort of grand coalition with the centre-left SPO and a smaller party like the Greens or liberal NEOS group. Our final story today is that this autumn, Earth is about to get a second moon. According to scientists, on the 29th of September, a small asteroid known as 2024 PT5 is going to be captured by Earth's gravitational pull and will linger in orbit for a couple of months before then escaping Earth's gravity. So, how does this actually happen? Well, the asteroid hails from the Arjuna asteroid belt, which contains rocks that follow an orbit quite similar to Earth's. Occasionally, some of these asteroids get relatively close to Earth, and by relatively close, we mean about 4.5 million kilometers, at which point, if it's moving slowly enough, Earth's gravitational field can trap it temporarily. But unfortunately for keen stargazers, the new mini-moon will be too small and dim to be seen, unless you have a professional telescope. But it's not your last chance, as similar mini-moons have been spotted before. Even this one, 2024 PT5, is set to return to Earth's orbit again in 2055. What do the world's best politicians have in common? They're willing to learn something new every day. And if you think that sounds too hard or too time-consuming or just too overwhelming for you to do, then you haven't tried Brilliant.org. Brilliant is where you learn by doing, with thousands of interactive lessons in maths, data analysis, programming, and AI. Like I said though, the real value here is that you can do this easily every day, truly committing to lifelong learning. Slowly, over time, you'll not only pick up new skills or get better at maths, but you'll also feel the satisfaction that comes with bettering yourself and staying ahead. For instance, if, like many world leaders, you want to get better at handling finances, you might want to check out the ton of new data science content Brilliant has just released, all of which uses real-world data to train you to see trends and make better informed decisions. They're perfect for learners of any level to start or continue learning data analysis, with a fun suite of new content covering data visualizations, algorithms, regression models, and more. Plus, you can gain additional insight by working with real datasets from sources like Airbnb, Spotify, Starbucks, and more. To try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days, click on the link in the description.